Welcome to the Newtown Big Dreams podcast, an interview-style talk show that's your gateway to the fabulous and fascinating people who relocated to start a new life. Whether you're new to our podcast or your city, our fellow neighbors from across Canada, North America, and the entire English-speaking world share their stories of reaching new horizons and big dreams. So sit back and relax as we navigate in-depth and intimate conversations with entrepreneurs, thought leaders, executives, creatives, and anyone who can share their story about their Newtown big dreams. And now, here's your host, Luke J. Menkes.
So, Steven,
Yes.
Thanks so much for coming in today.
Thanks for inviting me.
On a weekday. And I appreciate your time. You came to Kelowna in May 2014, but you had some back and forth between Kelowna and
Absolutely.
Edmonton.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I left Edmonton, no surprise,
Mm-hmm.
in 1999.
Oh.
And initially came to work in Kelowna.
Mm-hmm.
And worked in Kelowna till about 2007,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, was when an opportunity came up to relocate to the Lower Mainland and sort of continue with what I had been doing, sort of a rehab focus in the Lower Mainland. And over that time, we had a couple of kids. And started really deciding where we wanted to raise our family
Mm-hmm.
and where we wanted to see the next 10 or 15 years of our career, and made the decision to relocate back to Kelowna in the spring of 2014. So,
Right.
yeah.
So you first came here, was it 99?
99.
Yeah. And what made you choose Kelowna at 99?
1999, at that point, it was a job.
Oh, okay.
There
So
was
someone asked you to come here.
There was a job here in Kelowna, and at that time, when I graduated OT school, there weren't a lot of kind of full-time jobs, a lot of part-time, casual stuff. And so Kelowna kind of came on the radar. I didn't know a lot about Kelowna. I think I remember visiting here, vacationing with my dad when we were young, my brother and I, but didn't really have a lot of knowledge of Kelowna. And yeah, what a gem to get here, graduate university, and get a full-time job.
Now, had your wife visited before 2014? Or?
You know what? I met my wife here.
Okay.
So she is, about as a naturalized person in Kelowna you can be. So she's been here since she was little. But we met when I moved to Kelowna.
I see.
In 1999, we met, started dating, got married.
So it totally makes sense that you would decide to raise your kids here.
Absolutely. That Lower Mainland lifestyle, just didn't sort of fit with our vision of our family and what we thought was important. And Kelowna had a better rhythm, and if you can work and play in Kelowna, what a better place to be.
You spend a lot of time sitting in traffic, and especially trying to get kids to extracurricular and stuff, and it's time consuming to move around.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. You mean the Lower Mainland? Our kids were young, so they were involved in a lot of stuff. And just for work for me, we lived in Maple Ridge, but I actually worked in Surrey and Abbotsford. So I had to commute both directions either day, and so you're spending upwards of 2 hours a day extra in your car.
Yeah.
And now I think my commute's about 8 minutes.
That's perfect.
So, yeah.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
So you said OT. That stands for Occupational
Therapy.
So what is that?
It's a good question. I know when I graduated university, they said to come up with a quick 30-second elevator pitch.
Mm-hmm.
The best way I can answer that question is maybe by asking a question. And I ask people, what does occupation mean to you?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So when you hear someone say occupation, like, what does that mean?
Right.
Yeah. What do you...
So, for example, I'm a realtor, so I'm in my car a lot, but I spend a lot of time at a desk behind a computer. Yep. Use the telephone quite a bit.
Yep.
And for me, the biggest thing is like mental focus. So I find that a lot of times physically, I still have a lot of energy, but my brain is tired.
Yes.
And it's harder to, sometimes negotiations are delicate, and people get very sensitive
Yes.
and take things personally, especially in a tough negotiation. So my mental acuity is the most important thing, I would say.
Absolutely. So, for OT really works across the age spectrum, right? And for me, occupation not only incorporates what you do for a living, but it incorporates what you do for pleasure, what you do for exercise, what you do for taking care of yourself, right? Occupation for someone who's in grade school, for example, is going to be different, right? So their main occupation is being a student and playing. At the other end of the spectrum, someone who's retired, their occupation might be volunteering, might be leisure pursuits. It might be a part-time job. So OTs really work with persons to identify what's important for you to get back to doing, what's been impacted as a result of injury or illness, and what's important to you. So I think that's what drew me to the profession. Is it's very broad, it's very holistic, and it's very centered on what you find is important, right? Because it really doesn't matter what I think should be done. It's more about what you think is important and what you want to get back to doing. So OTs really work with people to help overcome some of those barriers that illness and injury sometimes present, to get people back to a life full of doing exactly what they want to do.
Right. So is it the same thing as physiotherapy, or is there some overlap?
You mean, definitely we work together. Like at CBI, we have physios in the clinic. They're an important part of our team. Physios will tend to work maybe at a smaller focus, being more focused on impairment. So they want to get the muscles strong. They want to get the joints moving again. They want to get your mobility up. Where an OT might come alongside that physio is okay, now that we've got that mobility back, how do we get that person back into work, back into their lifestyle again? And can they go back to doing it the way they were doing it before? Or now do they have to look at adaptations or modifications to doing it? You could imagine working with someone who maybe has sustained a brain injury or a spinal cord injury, that, they want to get back to driving, but they no longer have the use of their legs, right? So OTs will work alongside, and physios will work to rehabilitate, strengthen, and as get much mobility back as possible. So, it's a great team, and I went to school with physios, but definitely a little bit of a different focus, but definitely along the same recovery kind of pathway for people. You usually come alongside both of those professions.
Makes sense. Yeah. So you're currently taking a master's degree, and you said post-professional. Yeah. So is that where you're already in the workforce, and do you combine work experience with ongoing training? Yeah.
So the degree is built for people that are working. So it's for those professionals that have a bachelor's degree, but want to upgrade to a master's level. And so the education is very much geared towards building on that expertise and knowledge that you've attained in your profession, and just bringing you back up to speed with what's happening. It's been 20 years since I was back in formal education, so it's changed a ton.
So can you give us an example of an assignment you might have? Like, are you dealing with new technology or new research into muscles? And
from my perspective, it sounds a little nerdy, but it's really about taking a more organizational look at health, right? And from my perspective, I've really sort of focused my energy on taking a look at how insurance systems like ICBC, workers' compensation, how those play a role in people's recovery, and in that they do have an impact. So I've taken a bit of a higher level, where I'm not looking at mobility and assistive devices as much anymore, but more looking at how systems impact recovery and wellness for people. So, I kind of talk to my wife, kind of asks me, what are you writing about? And I said, I just wrote a paper on CPP disability. Right. And she goes, well, I should read it. I go, I don't know if you want to read it.
Would it involve some mathematics, some public policy?
Absolutely. Like I have an interest in policy design. If I probably wasn't an OT, I'd probably be a a political science guy.
I see.
So the role of health, the role of occupation, and how occupation is impacted by policy is something that I'm really interested in. So, that's really kind of where my thesis is kind of going in that end of things. But yeah, gone are the days of raised toilet seats and grab bars and things like that for me.
Right.
Really looking at it from a broader scope of it. So I think that's where the post-professional program really focuses on, is sort of taking OTs and maybe moving them into more of a policy area or more of an organizational leadership area for sure.
And where is the school?
It's Dalhousie, so I get to do it distance. So that's one of the advantages of going
for
to
those who don't know, where is
Dalhousie is physically in Halifax.
Right.
And so now, distance learning and distance education is pretty commonplace now. So that's a big difference from when I first went to school. Very little was done in group chats. Now there's group chats, discussions. You have access to every possible library and every possible database from your computer at home
that's
now.
Amazing.
So,
do you ever have to physically go to the school?
Yeah, when they do encourage that some time over the course of your thesis to maybe make an effort to get down, meet with your supervisor face-to-face as opposed to Skype.
Right.
And work through some stuff. But you don't have to. You could essentially get your whole degree online.
And I believe it's a beautiful campus. I've seen photographs.
Yeah, everyone's encouraged me to go, and the professors there. I've never been to Halifax myself.
Wow.
And so hopefully one day we can do maybe even a family trip to the East Coast.
It's a really beautiful part of the country, but it's a little bit hard to get to. I don't think there's any direct flights from even Vancouver. Maybe.
No, I think it's probably via Toronto, I would think is probably, and then Halifax from there. So it's on my bucket list for sure.
Right. So what, if a person gets injured on the job, walk us through a little bit of what a person is facing today. I know it's really complex. I believe we're very fortunate in Canada. If you compare, 240 some countries on the planet, we're among, from what I know, and you can clarify this, but I believe we're always in the top 15, top 20 as far as quality of life, and especially if something goes wrong in your life, like you have an injury or something.
I think we have, in Canada, we are fortunate to have a lot of systems, right? So if you have if you're in a car accident, we have ICBC.
Right.
If you're hurt at work in BC, we have WorkSafe BC. If you're off work due to illness or injury, a lot of employers will have long-term disability plans. And so those are like Great West Life and Manulife and things like that. We have CPP disability. We have a lot of different insurance systems that cover people in a variety of different circumstances. WorkSafe, workers' compensation is probably something a lot of people are familiar with. Most people have heard about it. Maybe they have experienced it personally. Maybe they know somebody that's had a workplace injury. But the good thing is that a large portion, I'd say 80%, and this has been supported by a lot of research, most people go through recovery fairly seamlessly, right? They get injured. They go to physio or maybe they go to chiropractic or whatever they might choose. They go back to work and things go pretty smoothly. Yeah. And that's for the majority of people. That's kind of 80%.
Do people know, heaven forbid, but if I were to get into an accident and have an injury today, I wouldn't know, other than go to the emergency. Yep. I wouldn't know what to do.
Absolutely. You don't know what you don't know. Right. This is sort of what I tell people. I'll teach a couple classes to some of the workers that are in our programs. And I'll say, how many of you guys researched workers' compensation before you got injured? Nobody puts their hand up, right? It's one of those things that it's like insurance, right? You buy into it and you kind of hope you never have to use it.
Yeah. I went through a hurricane in 2004 in the Cayman Islands. And after the hurricane, was the first time I ever read an insurance policy.
Absolutely. Right. And I'd say that's the same for car accidents, the same for workplace injuries. The first thing, if it's broken or bleeding, go to the doctor, right? Obviously. After that point in time, when you really want to connect with your family physician, not everyone has the luxury of having a family doctor in Kelowna. That's a little bit of the challenge right now with people connecting with family physicians, but go to a walk-in. Stick with a walk-in doctor that you like. Right. That's what I always tell patients. Say, go to the same one, right? So find out when he's working, or he or she when they're working, and try to stick with them if you can. It's likely going to lead to a better consistency of care. But stick with your doctor. Your doctor really is your gatekeeper to care. But you can go to physio. You could go. That's usually where most people start. Is they go, okay. I mean, if it's something that I think I can move and rehabilitate, then let's get started. If it's a fracture or something more serious, then I might need a little bit of time for more of a convalescent period to recover. But most people start with physiotherapy, and so at CBI, that's where people enter. Right?
What's CBI?
CBI is where I work for. So Canadian Back Institute is the name of the company, and so we're an interdisciplinary healthcare provider in town, and so we're familiar with WorkSafe BC and ICBC.
And you're dealing with back injuries.
Back in the day, I think when the company was founded 40 years ago, back injuries were the big injury. They still make up a large portion of workplace injuries. I think it's still about 25% of workplace injuries are backs. But it's not just backs anymore. It's shoulders, it's necks, it's knees, it's ankles. It's everything. So, I think CBI kept the name, but it's a little bit more than backs now.
Okay.
But yeah, people start with physio, and you really want to connect with a healthcare provider as quickly as possible, right? And the second thing I would do is I'd go on the WorkSafe BC website. Right. Get on the website, figure out what's out there for services, because you don't know what questions to ask if you're not informed. And I think that's the biggest challenge most people face with a workplace injury is, now what do I do? Right. And are they going to force me back to work if I'm not feeling good? What are my rights? And the system can be very disempowering to people. And so educating yourself in this new reality and this new institutional reality that people are dealing with is overwhelming. And so we get a lot of people coming in, they ask, now what do I do? Right. And so I think it's important for people to, choose a provider that they feel can answer those questions for them.
I see. Yeah. So what, from a policy perspective and some of the things you're researching and working on in your master's, what are some of the improvements that you would like to see to the system?
Yeah, I've started to really pay attention to a lot of what's the concepts of what are called organizational justice, right? So these are concepts like distributive justice, perceived justice, how people perceive justice within insurance systems is really important. Yeah. What I've come to understand is people see insurance from a moral perspective, right? They want to be treated fairly. They want to be trusted. Yeah. They want honesty and integrity in the system that they're in. And what they might find on the insurance side of it is they might not hold the same values. Although a lot of these insurance systems profess client-centeredness, wanting to do right by workers. A lot of the publications and information you see is very financially driven. And so there's often an imbalance between what the worker perceives they need and maybe what the insurance process or procedure is. Yeah. And so, I think if I could snap my fingers and change something, would to humanize the insurance process a bit, have time to meet with the person that you're talking to on the phone. A lot gets accomplished over a cup of coffee. Yeah. And that there's a real human side to injury and illness that I think gets missed because time isn't spent in getting to know who the person is. Yeah. And so I think in some cases that's where we see struggles, when people are struggling with an insurance system. It's because they feel an injustice, a lack of trust. They feel the process has dehumanized them to some degree. And they come to our clinic for rehab, and we're like, okay, where do we start? It's no longer about the back and the shoulder anymore. This person really perceives that they're being treated unfairly. Yeah. And so we really have to find that balance between policy and financial obligation and remaining, responsible to shareholders and employers, but also not going too far where we're dehumanizing the fact that real suffering can be experienced by people going through this, and it's true suffering. And so we need to be sensitive to that in some way, but still also, create a pathway for people to recover. So, I guess that would be my utopian vision of insurance, is how can we make that balance work? How can we make it feasible financially? Because of that 20% of people that don't get better.
Yeah.
Very little of it has to do with that they didn't get the right surgery or they didn't get the right physio. It's how were they treated?
Yes.
And were they treated fairly? Were they treated with respect? Were their expectations made clear to them of what was required of them? Were they allowed time to heal and play the sick role?
Yes.
Right? Because part of insurance and getting an insurance claim accepted is you have to be sick.
Yes.
Right? And so were they allowed to be sick for a while? And is that okay?
Yes.
Right? So, we could talk for hours, Luke, on some of the deep undercurrents and discourses that go around this stuff. But I think maintaining the fact that there's humans on both sides of the equation.
Yes.
There's a human sitting behind the desk making adjudicative decisions. And there's also a human on the other side that is wanting to get well. Nobody wants to go off work because of illness or injury. No one plans for early retirement through an injury at work or getting in a car accident. It just doesn't happen. It's just not true. Those are one of the myths out there, right? When people are off on injury, that they're on vacation. It's just not true. And so I think maintaining a humanistic perspective on both sides of the equation is important. And again, a lot gets solved around a dinner table.
Yes.
Or a coffee table, having a coffee and talking to the person about what's important to you. How do you see yourself getting well in this system? And what can I do to help?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
My biggest frustration personally, in the few times I've had to deal with insurance, and I haven't had to deal with health insurance, fortunately. I have gone to walk in for various things. So I guess that covers that, but I've never had a serious injury. But with, car insurance and the hurricane insurance, the biggest frustration that I sensed, and with the hurricane, there were thousands of us going through this simultaneously, and it was perceived lack of transparency. So the insurance company started to educate us on the policy, but after the fact. And many of the provisions of the policy were reasonable. We understood it from the shareholders of the insurance company's perspective, but we kind of felt like we were a little bit duped. Like that wasn't explained to us over the 20, 30 years we were paying into policies.
Yeah,
These
absolutely.
things were explained to us after the fact, and it's legalese and very fine print, which is hard to read and hard to understand.
It is. And if you could imagine, complicating that with, say, someone who has English as a second language, or someone that's maybe dealing with a mood disorder, right? And maybe feeling a little depressed and can't quite focus.
Yeah.
So you can imagine how easy it is to get overwhelmed by these processes. So, yeah, I've had experiences with home insurance, and, I have a wonderful spouse who just, she's a fighter, and she steps up and goes to bat and pushes and challenges insurance companies to be transparent. But it's the exception as opposed to the rule. So yeah, that what I kind of call that sort of distributive justice, like understanding the outcome, right? And the procedural justice. How are you making decisions?
Yes.
What steps are you following, and how can I get access to that information? And how can you communicate that to me in a way that I understand is challenging. So, yeah, and if you complicate health on top of that, right, and someone now paying your wages, and you have concerns about how decisions are being made, how stressful that can be.
Yeah.
And so you add stress onto recovery, and then all bets are off. When you get stress and anxiety mixed into the equation, it makes it very challenging to recover.
Right. Steven, you also specialize in mental health, and you touched on it briefly. Are there a lot of disability claims with regards to mental health, and how are people treated? Because quite often these are not curable per se. They're kind of ongoing situations.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mean from a statistical perspective, I would say mood disorders, if we look at it from a, say, long-term disability perspective, mood disorders are probably in the top 3.
Wow.
Okay, so that's taking into consideration cancers, cardiac conditions. Mood disorder is up there. So anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, clinical depression, these are huge. These are huge disabling disabilities now that people are dealing with. So it's extremely common now on the what I call the non-occupational side. So non-work related, right? So, however, on the occupational side, on the work-related piece of it too, there's been significant legislative changes with WorkSafe BC in regards to the acknowledgement of post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, and workplace harassment and bullying. They've really advanced their policy in regards to acknowledging those as hazards. And now I've seen a growing number of claims being accepted for mental health reasons as well. So it's definitely the fastest growing injury and illness demographic out there right now.
Right.
Yeah.
I know you probably can't give specific advice, but just as a hypothetical, I have an acquaintance. She's going through what she feels is a pretty severe sexual harassment situation. It's causing her emotional distress.
Right.
And not by the boss, but by a subordinate.
Yeah.
And the boss is refusing to deal with it. What is the first thing? Like she's tried to speak to the boss. They don't work. What is the first thing someone suffering from mental effects would do?
You know, if it's work related and it's in the context of work, you mean there is a process to submit claims to WorkSafe BC.
It's WorkSafe BC.
To review and adjudicate. And so you mean that process is available to people, but not without its own complications, right? You mean there's a high degree of what we call non-reporters. So people that have possibly a work-related claim that won't report their injury. And there's a variety of reasons why, right? One is maybe they don't know they have possible entitlement. Right? Maybe they don't know they can actually submit a claim. Maybe they don't think they qualify for it. Or maybe there's fear of reprisal, right? And so there's lots of reasons why people don't report. But, you know, my first advice for anyone would be go and talk to your family physician. You know, go talk to your family physician. Most physicians are, you know, aware of what this, what the opportunities are with respect to filing a claim. And then again, go on the WorkSafe BC website and figure out what's there. Like figure out what information is there. And then, because really the doctor is going to be your gatekeeper to helping you file a claim in that respect. And so, yeah, for anybody who's dealing with a situation like that in the workplace is to, you know, figure out what you have available to you. And then everyone has to make that decision of what the situation dictates. It's not clear for everybody, but what you don't want to be is you don't want to be suffering, right? Life is short. You don't want to be in a situation where you're suffering and you want to get well. And sometimes these situations are just horrible. So talk to your physician, find out what your options are, and see if they can create a pathway where you can get some services and get access to care, and then at least be at a point where you can make some decisions as to where you want to be in the long term. You know, if it's a unionized environment, you mean there's sometimes options through union and grievances. However, if you're a manager, sometimes you don't fall under the collective bargaining rules. And sometimes managers are kind of left out of those things. EFAP programs, most employers have what's called an employee assistance program, which you can access for free. So I would say most employers have that. That will give you minimally 6 to 8 sessions with a registered clinical counselor, psychologist, to at least get a game plan together. Right. So that's something that you could do right off the get-go, is call your EAP provider and find out if you can get some sessions and start having some dialogue with somebody and start building a bit of a team around you to help you manage it. Sounds like a really difficult scenario.
Yeah, that's very helpful. So, and I'm sure there's many listeners out there that are either going through something physically or mentally, or know someone who is. So I think your family doctor or a doctor that's familiar with you as your first point of contact is very good.
Absolutely. And I think part of it, though, too, is for patients, knowing what questions to ask is really important. Because we often hear of doctors feeling pressure to balance the time they give their patients. And so you might only have 5 or 10 minutes. So really going in with what you need and going in with a few pointed questions saying, okay, here's my scenario. Here's what I need. Where do I get it? And sometimes that takes a bit of investigation on people's half. The other thing too that I talk to people about, what is best practice for the treatment of mood disorder, right? A lot of people talk about that, and there's no surprise that the most prescribed drug out there is an antidepressant, and so a lot of people are quick to grab medication, but medication on its own isn't best practice, right? It's usually getting counseling, but also exercise. Exercise has been the most researched anti-anxiolytic, antidepressive treatment out there. It's highly effective. There's no side effects, and it's free. And so generally when we find people dealing with mood, there's usually a secondary impact activity. They're doing less. Right. So maybe they're not going for their morning walks anymore, or maybe they're not having social coffees with their friends anymore. And so maintaining activity, physical activity, social activity, extremely important when you're dealing with mood, because those things release little things called endorphins, right? And those are side effect free drugs that your brain produces. And so maintaining those joyful, happy things in your life is really important when you're going through stress. And so maintain a high level of activity, socialize with friends, connect with people you really like spending time with, go to the movies. The weather's gorgeous now. Hike up Knox Mountain, it's a wonderful time to be active in Kelowna. But that's a really important piece that often doesn't get prescribed. I think more doctors would like to prescribe exercise, and I think a lot of physicians do. But I don't think patients really understand how important it is. And there's no drug on the market that is effective in the treatment of mood disorder than exercise is.
So true.
And I think for me, what kind of brought me back to Kelowna was the opportunity to create a resource for people, right? A place where people could call, maybe even if we don't have the service they're looking for, to help them navigate, maybe questions to ask, and people they need to connect with. And so I think in the health community, I think there's very few opportunities for people to really go and get an interdisciplinary approach to care. CBI is one of those. And so, just availing ourselves as a clinic to the community at large to help people navigate through workplace injuries, car accidents, maybe post-cancer recovery, just generally not feeling well, they're dealing with depression or we had a lady walk in the other day who her husband has now been recently diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. And so she's just wondering about next steps and supports. And so that's really what brought me back to Kelowna, is to create a resource where a community could access and at least get some assistance and try to create a pathway that they need to help a friend or themselves feel better and get back to life.
That's great.
It's really important.
Well,
so
we all really appreciate it.
Thanks, Luke.
You're very welcome. Who would you like to nominate? Who would you find interesting to hear on this show?
My wife works at an amazing clinic called Occupational Health. And Grant's a family physician, but does stem cell and regenerative medicine here in Kelowna. An amazing guy to talk to. And so, Grant would be a great guy to talk to. So I'd definitely nominate Grant
That's great.
to come and share some time with you.
Well, Steven, it's been a fascinating conversation.
Yep.
I love this job of mine because I get to pick the brains of some of the most brilliant and interesting people in the city. And I really appreciate you coming down
thanks,
today.
Luke.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Newtown Big Dreams podcast with your host, Luke Menkes, and his authentic guests. And we love our listeners and hope you subscribe now to learn more about the amazing journeys of our incredible guests who relocated to find a new town, big dreams. And remember, make your dreams big.